Good afternoon to everyone. All right, thank you for being with us this afternoon. So we are going to talk about digital infrastructure. I've heard that this morning the minister mentioned all type of infrastructure, but digital infrastructure. So let's not criticize our host, but let's agree that digital infrastructure is key in everything, probably also per se, but also helping to solve mobility issues and energy issues and maybe social infrastructure issues. So I've got a prestigious panel with me this afternoon to discuss all that. I suggest to start right away with the digital plan. So let's start by first diagnosis and let's have a look on what has happened in the last 10 to 15 years. We have developed in France a fiber plan across the country, which is probably the most advanced in Europe. What I would like is to have your views, and I will let you introduce yourself. That will be well done. Your views on this plan, what worked well, what worked maybe less well, and what can we take from that to address the next issues. Let's start by you, Philippe, and then Ramon.
Thank you, Vincent. Yes, this morning, Bruno Le Maire forgot speaking about digital infrastructure, but you know, I have to say that the French government is very and strongly involved in such a topic, and we have a dedicated minister who is Jean-Noël Barrot, very involved and focusing on the broadband coverage everywhere in France. And as you say, Vincent, this story is quite crazy because, you know, 10 years ago, digital infrastructure in France were not developed as they are today. We were far away the other European countries, and we decided through a big plan, a national plan, to develop fiber everywhere 10 years ago. 10 years ago only, and it started already 5 years ago. And the situation today is this one. More than 80% of households are covered by FTTH solutions. And 15 million households today are connected to fiber in France. It's increasing every year. Every year we are covering 5 million households every year, and we want to achieve this before the end of 2025 with a 100% coverage in fiber in France for fixed access. And you know, it's possible only because French government decided to establish the rules. Local authorities were involved where broadband is not, where it's expensive to deploy fiber networks. And all the industry in InfraNum worked on this. You know, in InfraNum, we are the largest organization on broadband in France with 230 companies inside, telecom operators, manufacturers, builders, and a lot of people working. More than 500 people are working every day in InfraNum in order to develop the infrastructure. This plan is a plan in which works 40,000 people every day to build the network, to operate the networks, and it's something quite crazy because it was so fast. Maybe it was too fast, but it was so fast, and now we are proud about this. But there is new games, new things to work on in order to be successful, but it will be the next step. I have to say, everything is not good on broadband access in France, but this plan changed everything in France.
Yes, Ramon, you've got, of course, a special situation on this as the top executive at Orange. Orange has been a driving force of this plan. So that's interesting to have your views on what happened, on both in terms of operation, regulation, and of course financing during this rollout.
Thank you, Vincent, and good afternoon. I very much agree with what has been said. If you look at the major European countries, France is clearly well in advance. We now have in France 30 million connectable homes and 15 million customers, and by 2025, as it has been said, the whole country will be with an access to fiber for those customers who would like to be connected with fiber. So this is a huge achievement, and it has been done in roughly 10 years, which is incredibly rapid. And I must say that France Télécom Orange, I'm Deputy CEO of Orange and more specifically in charge of finance, it has been a huge effort, which was not at all obvious at the time, and which is a choice that other operators in Europe have not all made yet, 10 years later. So it was possible because there was a big plan. In France, we like planification, and I think it can help. But it's also an industrial choice, a company choice, and it's a risk that Orange took at the time, which was not so evident because it means a huge investment effort. We have invested on fiber 13 billion euros in 10 years, and the net result of Orange is around 2 billion a year. So you can see that this effort is huge. It's huge. And I think the result is a big success, and that we can all be proud of it. And we have deployed nearly 2/3 of the total number of plugs in France, just as Orange. So I think the first thing to say is, yes, collectively, it's a big achievement, and it has been done with all the stakeholders, all the subcontractors, all the partners, the other operators, the government, which had some support also to accompany the move. But I think when you ask Vincent, okay, what is the achievement and what are the questions, I think it's good also to be honest on what are some drawbacks or some consequences. And I would see 3 or 4. But never forget the first part of the answer, which is that it's a fantastic achievement. But the first thing is when you go as fast, necessarily you have some quality issues. You cannot go as fast with everything being perfect. It has been said already, but we know we have some issues. And we even have some crash programs in some companies to try and improve the quality of the service for the customer. So the customer experience from time to time is not so fantastic because we were so fast, all of us. So we have to have this in mind. The second element, which I think is very important for those, and now we are discussing about France only, but when you go as fast, you recruit many people, you have all an ecosystem which gets mobilized to rush, and then at some point, it's done. And so all those who have been mobilizing themselves to roll out the fiber, to connect the people, they have to reorganize themselves. They have to find some other markets. So it's a challenge and an opportunity at the same time. Maybe we'll come back to it later. But we know it's going to be a big issue for, la filière. We shouldn't hide from it, and we should be aware. And on a short-term basis, by the way, when you see inflation, when you see costs going up everywhere, there is probably a necessity to find, a new kind of modus operandi with all the subcontractors, with all those involved. So it's in fact a tricky time. And the last point would be to say that this huge effort in investment is not totally trivial, because at least for the companies who are listed, like Orange, financial markets do not like CapEx so much. They do not like these huge investments so much.
They do like.
Yes, I know investment funds, but when you are a listed company, either you get out of the stock market or you live with the constraints of being a listed company. And so the CapEx challenge is a huge one and has driven some moves in many companies that also, I think, should deserve some attention.
Yes, no, that's clear. What is interesting in your view is this rollout has been done through an open market, free market, some would say, versus some big infrastructure plan that was done in the past in France with a good old-style monopoly. What you are saying is Orange could adapt to this new market organization and with constraint, but did it well.
Yes, I think we did well, but when you look at some other big telco operators in Europe, which are listed, you should not be totally surprised that they are slow in rolling out fiber, because the return on investment is very long, and the pressure of short term is something that you have to cope with. So for different players, different countries, different scenarios, you have to keep in mind the fact that you have public money, you have public subsidies, but in France, not so much. Not so much. Most of the FTTH has been rolled out through private resources in France.
Yeah, we come back to this cooperation between, of course, financier, investors, and operators, which is certainly in the interest of this assembly. Before that, Alexis, I would like your views on, because of course this market has been organized by the regulator. I remember 10 or even more than that, 12 years ago in this same location, a lot of critics about this plan. And the regulator did his job to make it work, more or less, with a lot of imperfection. But at the end, how would you consider the current regulation to achieve what was achieved, basically roll out fiber across the country?
Thank you very much, Vincent. Thanks, everybody. And I would be rewinding a bit and just to emphasize on the, I would say, the title of this session that was autonomy, right? Strategic autonomy. And as far as I am concerned, autonomy for me means stability. And Vincent, you are exactly highlighting what is true in this industry and in this very part of the infrastructure. And as far as, again, I'm concerned, digital infra telco has been the key milestone of infra in France for the last, I would say, 10 years, with acceleration the last 5 years. Why? Because we have a very stable, I would say, pyramid or triangle that I see here. On the top, as you mentioned, you have a very, I would say, complex but sophisticated and now stable regulation. We have two authorities, ARCOM and ARCEP, and mainly ARCEP has built a very, I would say, complex, asymmetrical and symmetrical regulation. Asymmetrical meaning that for large operators, they have to maintain competition to a certain extent and to allow access to the network. That has not been easy. Then you have this tariffication also regulation that applies to large-scale operators, and you have then this symmetrical regulation that applies to all the operators, that is, to a certain extent, obliging operators to deploy. It's deploying the fiber, the FTTH, but also now the 5G. So this is the top of the triangle, and then in the middle of the triangle, you have in France, and I'm very proud of that, and we can be proud of that in this industry to export and also to export beyond France. It's the contractual framework that works. It's public-private contractual framework, which is on one hand concession and on the other hand délégation de service public. It's really complex, but it's a balanced, I would say, architecture that provides comfort and stability to all the actors, operators, industrials, but also public authority and investors. And last but not least, the triangle has a base. I would say it's the cement, and the cement back then, 10 years ago, it was the project, the Greenfield projects, and back then, I would remind the role that has been played here, not directly by the public authority, at a certain extent by the financial arm of the public authority, with the Caisse des Dépôts and Banque des Territoires, that was fueling the business with equity and at the same time maintaining, I would say, peace between the stakeholders and a very, I would say, intelligent and smart governance that has also, as you have mentioned, conserve the trust with the local authorities. So again, to summarize for me, this business is ensuring autonomy because it is stable. It will evolve, of course. The quality of service needs to be maintained, and regulators are putting some scrutiny between copper, cuivre, and fiber, and there's a migration between cuivre, copper, and fiber, and it's not an easy one, and regulation is to become at certain points some constraints in order to maintain quality of service and migration, but also in certain sector, I would say large in the FTTO sector, the B2B business, competition also need to be a bit emphasized and maintained.
Thank you, Alexis. What I suggest now, of course, these 10 years are done, and as you said, France is probably ahead of our partners in Europe. This is raising a lot of issues that we have today. I would like to start by a development issue. I mean, we have today developed a filière, a skill set in France that can be not only used for development, but an opportunity for us to continue to develop that in France. I mean, the digital is not over, the 5G is coming, the cloud is developing. So we've got more to do in France to develop our digital infrastructure, but also to export that. We at InfraVia, we have developed this skill set in France for the last 10 years that we recently use across Europe. So we know what we are talking about. So my first point today would be development issues. I can start with you, Philippe, and then I'll come back to financial issues and the business model issues, Ramon, of course.
Yes, thank you, Vincent. The development for all the companies in InfraNum is something we're working every day. But you know, I have to underline the fact that, as you said just before, the investment done by public companies, public groups, are very huge. It's more than 2/3 of the investment for fiber, private investment, and only less than 1/3 from public authorities. And as you said, the government, the public funds, and the public local authorities are playing a real game in this success. And that's why maybe it works, because thanks to French government, local authorities, and public private investors like French operators. And the future now is something we are focusing today, because the end of the plan, the national plan, is for 2 years. In 2 years, 40,000 people who are working today in the deployment will change activities. You know, we are connecting people, we are digging in the street to put the ducts and so on, the fiber, and after what? And that's why we launched some projects in France and also outside France in order to capitalize on the manpower, the skills, all this experience in France. And it works, you know. We are building some global project in Europe, in Africa, with a lot of companies working together. The French model can be developed in other countries. You were mentioning what's coming in Germany. You know, in Germany, 25% of the fiber is deployed by French companies. In England, it's the same. 25% of the fiber in England are deployed by French companies. In Africa, we are building some big project and in a win-win way of working with the partners, with the government and local authorities. And it's possible because, you know, our companies have a lot of experience on what we can do, how we can deploy with a cost-efficient way for the fiber in such countries. But there is also some future in France as well. Because, as you said just before, everyone knows this. We were deploying this network in 5 years. It never happened in the past. If you can consider the copper or the energy, smart grid or whatever, it never happened in the past. And there is a lot of things to do to improve the quality of the network, to become resilient. We are speaking about autonomy, getting a piece of autonomy on the networks. It's also trying to put some fibers underground and not only in aerial ways. And you have to consider that 53% of the networks today in France have been deployed on aerial puzzles. It's something strange, because if ever some climate change can affect the networks, it's something very, very strong, and it can happen everywhere. Then we have to dig and to put fiber underground. We have to secure the networks, and this is a big plan we have to work on for the next 10 years. And I can say that a lot of people are working today on this, and it will employ a lot of people working on this for the next 10 years. We say it's something between 8 to 10 billion euros investment. We have to find the keys. Maybe investor will be called again to help this project. And we have also some innovation to develop together in smart cities. I know Orange, for example, is very involved in this, but other players are becoming strong on this. Smart city is the future for local authorities, and we have a lot of projects who are coming from the ground in order to reduce the cost of energy, the cost of public lighting, and so on. And I'm sure it will be a key driver for next year's for InfraNum and all the companies inside our group.
Thank you, Philippe. Ramon, of course, you can complete on the development aspect. I'm sure you've got a view on smart city, inclusion, and energy. Of course, I would like to come back. We are an assembly of financial players. On what you said on financing all this capex, you mentioned that a lot of private money were mobilized. There was maybe a reason why, in terms of risk return and cost of capital. You, Orange, you have chosen a different route. That's probably a good attendance to develop that in terms of finance. I've got a second financial question regarding inflation. The sector has lived with a low inflation, if not deflation. We are entering in a new era in terms of inflation. How do you apprehend that? How do you see it will change the behavior of the operators and, of course, the impact on the filière?
Thank you, Vincent. So it's many big questions. I think on development, the first thing would be to say we need to finish the job in France, obviously, but not only. Orange is active in 7 European countries and 18 countries in Africa, Middle East. I was in Senegal last week, where we are investing in Senegal, through Sonatel, in fiber. Fiber is also not only here in Europe, but also in Africa, Middle East. So there is a huge challenge worldwide in order to bridge the digital divide. It exists here in this advanced economy, but it also exists everywhere. And we are trying to buy companies in Belgium now, which was done in Romania last year, in order to have a better access to fixed broadband networks. And we did not talk about mobile, but you alluded to it. When we have to deploy 5G, it's also a huge change. So the question about how are we going to develop these networks in order to, help people to be able to work from home, to access to content, etc., companies, this is a huge challenge which will request huge investments. And so I think one question we will have is, what is the best organization in order to feed these investments? In the past few years, you have seen a radical change in Europe about our organization. You have many telco players who have decided to sell their infrastructures, fixed and or mobile. I think in 10 years, when we will look backwards and when we will think about digital sovereignty in Europe, digital independence in Europe, I think some people will have questions, okay? This is why we have decided not to sell our infrastructures, and we are in a very small minority group, I must say, which makes our life, from time to time, not so easy, because people say, why don't you sell? The price for these assets is much higher than the value investors attribute to the core company, so why don't you sell? We don't have time to go through the whole discussion, but my very simple point here is these are strategic assets for us, I think for the countries, and at some point having, let's say, a system which drives, but I know, Vincent, we can discuss this together, that we have a system which drives telco players just to sell their infrastructures, I think is not a good system. I'm very much convinced about this, and I think in a few years, some people will say, oh my God, what have I done? So maybe I'm wrong, but I think it's an important important question. And then it comes about capital allocation, return on investment, etc. And I think our job as a telco player is to make sure they are going to manage these infrastructures as best as we can. This is why we have implemented a tower company for mobile, which is new. In Orange, it's a big step for an incumbent player to have a tower co, not totally trivial. And we have some fiber companies where we work with private equity in France, Orange Concession, those who live in France know about Orange Concession. And in Poland, we also have, with a private equity fund, a fiber company. So it's not monolithic. But in all these cases, we have the capacity to take back control at some point. So this is one of our issues. How much to open your capital? How much do you share? And how much control do you retain on what you think is a strategic infra, even if you have pressure to sell? It's a big question. Last point, when you think about these issues, the theme of sovereignty, capacity to innovate, etc., leads to a broader issue of who is financing, including the platforms, over-the-top platforms. There is a big discussion in Europe now about what we call fair share. How much do the big techs pay to access these networks? Big discussion. The European Commission is opening a consultation. It's going to be an interesting debate. No consensus on this, but interesting topic. And I think there is an issue also on competition policy. How these players are going to be able to compete in a world where big giants are playing with different rules. So interesting questions ahead.
Yeah, no, certainly. I don't want to reopen the debate on private money versus public money. Of course, I've got a very different view. And there is certainly an arbitrage between short-term value, because your policy, you leave some value on the table short-term, and long-term value. There is also a way to manage that, but that's a different debate. Maybe one point I would like to insist, because I know that this assembly is I mean, that's one of a topic, is inflation. You skipped it. It's a difficult point. We have lived in a world with no inflation. Telecom was really even a deflation business. Today we see inflation everywhere. That includes capex, of course. That includes salaries. That includes energy. We will have to accept that at some point. And that's probably a challenge for all stakeholders. Maybe, Alexis, you want to touch that, and then we can come back?
You have already said everything, Vincent. Thank you very much. But something that was missing, I invite everybody to have a look on the rapport Perrier that was provided by the president of Amundi, and that highlights the impact of the Green Deal on all industries. Green Deal being the EU regulations, basically it's Fit for 55, that is the roadmap, and then you have hard regulation, that is a taxonomy. You know, now we are, in terms of energy transition, we are getting from ESG and soft law to proper regulation that will be impacting also all the industries, and especially digital infra. And if you go to the details, then I mean, I was speaking with a friend of mine who is also a client, saying, no, my business, it's not carbon adverse. It's more complex, because if you go to the details, it's scope 1 is the business as is. Scope 2 is to what extent your business is using electricity. data centers, etc. And scope 3 is how your clients at the end of the day have a bad or good carbon footprint. And to be taxonomy compliant, you have to comply with all these 3, I would say, scopes. So that is something that you need more and more to take into account when you are thinking of my very beginning triangle on the top on the regulation. And this is not a surprise that last year, La Loi Chess has granted new power and new capacity to the ARCEP that has now directly the power to gather and to collect information in relation to energy transition, not only inside the operators, but also going beyond clients and also how it is electricity and energy sensitive. So this is one layer of, I would say, complexity on the top of the triangle that is not shaping the stability, but needs to be taken care of.
All right, I've been accelerated because we've got a big thing to sign at the end of this panel. Maybe one last tour. I read an article on, I don't know if it was The Economist or whatever, which was like, forget ESG because E is going to kill us short term. So
energy
let's
transition.
Forget ESG and focus on E. Well, I'm not sure I fully agree with that. And certainly the digital infrastructure and the digital operators are not only a focus, but also can be a solution on, as I said, mobility issues, energy issues, aménagement du territoire issues, and so social.
But Vincent, becoming compliant here will have impact on CapEx and also.
So my point is, let's conclude on this panel. What is for you at stake for tomorrow? That is, of course, a question of finance, but we touch that. We know the money is there, and we are collectively able to mobilize it. Where do you think we should put our focus in terms of operation, in terms of deployment, and in terms of regulation? And we can conclude with that.
Yes, for us, for InfraNum, the key is clearly, regarding the international development of our companies, the key is clearly the way we can finance the project in Africa, in Europe. And that's why we are about to sign a strategic partnership with Europlace just in 2 or 3 minutes, because we think it's very important for us to give the keys to the partners and to the operators to develop themselves in other countries, thanks to what's happening today in France.
I agree with this, and I would say that when you look at ESG and the E part of it, the carbon part, the digital sector is much more a solution than a problem. So we have to explain this, and we have to organize ourselves collectively in order to help this positive contribution from the digital economy, and this is what we are working on all together. And I think it's full of opportunities. We have addressed some of them. These are exciting challenges, and I think that we need to find the proper balance, I would say, on short-term, medium, and long-term issues, which is the challenge we all have to address.
Okay, thank you very much. I think we can agree that the French ecosystem is one of the richest in this country. Not everyone has the same policy, but we've got big leaders, big worldwide leaders. We've got one of the smartest entrepreneurs. We've got enough money, enough finance, private or public, to finance all that. We've got a regulator who has been more or less in line to support and to push this development. And even if the minister has forgotten us this morning, we know that the digital infrastructure is at the heart of his policy. So let's be proud and let's use this advantage to continue this development. We didn't talk about the cloud and all the digital issues in terms of sovereignty, but also in terms of opportunities that we've got there, and we will be able to address all these issues. I've been urged to end this panel early, so I can leave the floor. I think Philippe has something to announce and to sign on stage. So congratulations to him, and thank you very much to all of you.